Our movie this week is David Fincher's Mank.
Mank, a film
Mank.
about film.
Mank, it's Orson Welles.
Of course it is.
I think it's time we talk.
What is it the writer says? Tell the story you know.
A film about film that is not annoying. Well, maybe some people find it annoying. I didn't.
This is the response to this film has been very interesting.
It has. Weirdly polarizing for a David Fincher movie.
Yeah.
And I can't say I disagree with a lot of the criticisms. Because I don't think this is a masterpiece. I think this is really, really messy.
This is David
but
Lynch's
I really, really like it.
Messy.
Lynch.
Not David Lynch. Why did I say David Lynch? David Fincher.
Yeah.
His most messy film. And it's not clear cut as to what it's going to be. I'm curious is like, because like when Social Network came out, it wasn't universally like hailed as a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Which it is pretty much now. I'm curious as to what the ongoing response to Mank will be, which only time will tell.
I feel like Gone Girl was similar. I feel like people weren't super...
Gone Girl, I felt like the response was, this is great. Nothing like amazing.
Yeah.
But no one was saying anything negative about it. People have negative things to say about Mank.
Yeah. I feel like that's a lot of his movies. I know Fight Club was, I don't want to say divisive. It definitely underperformed and it didn't do super well critically. I know Zodiac was another one that came out and people like not that into it.
Yeah. So
the Social Network, it was not masterpiece tier, but it did really well and people liked it.
Yeah. So if I were David Lynch right now, I'd be sitting comfortably.
You said Lynch again.
Knowing David fucking Fincher. Maybe I do need a drink.
They sound similar.
Well,
they do sound Davids. Similar. They're both Davids. They both made a black and white movie.
Fincher, David.
Well, the movie is basically about Herman Mankiewicz, aka Mank, the original screenwriter,
the titular
for
Mank.
Citizen Kane. And do you know the story about how this movie came to be?
I do not.
Oh, okay, interesting. So this movie was actually written by his father, Jack Fincher.
I did see that, yeah.
So his father wrote the screenplay about Herman Mankiewicz. It's not like completely aligning with Pauline Kael's essay that she did on Orson Welles, which are you familiar with this at all?
Yes, I am. I'm actually, you say it's not aligning with her essay, but I feel like it's leaning heavily towards that essay.
It is, but it's not. Pauline Kael's essay pretty much outright accused Orson Welles of stealing all of the glory.
Which, most likely was just her hit piece on Orson Welles, because
it is a hit piece because, for one thing, I can get behind the idea that Mank wrote the whole thing, which he probably did. But the original draft is like 220, 240 pages, and Orson Welles cut it down and made it fit to the visual language of film. One thing that he did, the famous dinner scene in Citizen Kane, which, it's one of those, it's the scene where he has dinner with his wife and it flashes forward through time and jumps back years and years down the line so you can see the divide that starts to grow. That scene was originally much, much longer and it took place over multiple years. Touches like that where Orson Welles took really good ideas, cut them down and made them filmable, which is not nothing. And he also changed some of the dialogue and stuff. I get why someone might think that Orson Welles stole all the credit, but you have to understand that you have to make changes for it to actually work as a movie. And Orson Welles shared the screen credit and it's on the same page, same title card in the actual movie. So I don't think he was trying to. I don't know. I don't believe this. It is a hit piece and this movie aligns more with Pauline Kael than Welles, but I don't think it goes full Pauline Kael.
I think it's in an odd space in between. Although I think that's more of a kind of an end of the film discussion that I might elaborate more on later. But I do think I might land more on. It's funny, after watching a 2-hour film on Herman Mankiewicz. All I can think is, yeah, I think Orson Welles probably had the biggest voice in this.
Yeah.
In terms of like, I think you could say that the film, and I think probably obviously in history, Citizen Kane was the kind of brainchild of Herman Mankiewicz. As like the broad strokes of the narrative are his, and what it would become is ultimately rests in his hands and creating it. But I think you have to look at enormous rewrites that Orson Welles did to bring it to the level that we know it is, and that deserves equal writing credit, which is what ultimately happened.
Yeah.
Although the film is much more in Mank's camp, but that is perhaps getting a little too far ahead of ourselves.
But
Mank,
well,
yeah.
Well, hold on. I continue with the actual Inception. I'll keep it brief. Jack Fincher wrote this a while ago. David Fincher wanted to make this shortly after Seven. He's been wanting to make this movie for a long time. Jack Fincher died in like 2003, and it wasn't until Netflix started going batshit insane with the things that it makes that David Fincher saw an opportunity to make Mank. So this movie is written by his father, directed by David Fincher. And yeah, it's not something that came about recently. It's been in the works for a while. And I also think that's partially why the movie's kind of messy, because it almost feels like Fincher. It's similar to Sorkin, where Sorkin initially had a much bigger script for The Social Network. David Fincher cut it down and cut it down and cut it down and made it super efficient. I feel like he was a little more hesitant to do that because it was his father, and his father is dead.
Yeah.
So it almost feels like a therapeutic movie in a way.
But cut it, slash it, slash it. It's never a good idea to not cut stuff out of a movie. Like, if you can, do it. Like, if it's even a possibility, you should think of a way to cut it out. But that's
but that's the thing, is that there's a lot in this movie that is unnecessary, but it's never not entertaining. So that's why I kind of give it a pass.
So I'm not even sure that there's a lot in this film that is unnecessary. Like, it's a complicated movie, and there's a lot going on, and I don't think it's just as simple as it could have been cut out or it could have been slimmed down. It is, but that's maybe simplifying it too much. And so to summarize, I liked Mank quite a bit, but I don't think I liked Mank for the reasons that the film was going for, or at the very least, I was focusing on other aspects of the film rather than Herman Mankiewicz as like the main character.
The Mank character.
The Mank character.
Ready and willing to hunt a great white whale?
Just call me Ahab.
Tell the story you know.
I hear you're hunting dangerous game.
This is different. This is about something.
And it was ultimately a rather enjoyable experience for me, and I liked the film, though it doesn't come together for me.
No.
I love movies about Hollywood history and all that, so I can't actually dislike it in any way.
Yes. It's oddly enough, it's been getting a lot of comparisons to that movie, The Artist. Did you ever see that?
I did. It's been a long time. I watched it when it came out.
Yeah.
It's been 10
it's
years.
getting a lot of similar vibes to The Artist, but I think that the degree to which they go to recreate this feel, the feel of a 1930s/40s Hollywood movie, I think that is pretty insane of itself, although there are some elements that you're like, come on, really? Like the cigarette burns digitally added to the digital film, or the digital whatever.
Well, with the whole digital thing, it's David Fincher, and got it right. Didn't say David Lynch.
He did a good job.
The man is notorious for doing a lot of takes and having a lot of like effects work, and I don't know, like it doesn't need to be in film. I'm not a film purist. It would have been nice.
No, I'm not either.
But
I'm not a film purist by any means, but when you have this movie that is so dedicated to recreating this feel and this look, I almost feel like film is something you should do. I don't know.
Yeah.
Because things like things like messing with the audio, I like that.
Yeah.
The score I think is amazing, and it was recorded all with instruments available from the time. Incredible. The dialogue is very similar to that kind of.
Yeah.
The dialogue's amazing, constantly. But I don't know. A lot of the color grading was also very odd. Like the outside scenes between Mank and Shelley's daughter. I don't know her name. Big-eyed woman from Mamma Mia. Amanda Seyfried.
Yeah, as Marion Davies.
Yeah, Marion Davies. That's right. I think a lot of the outside scenes looked strange. It was, I don't know, it didn't look as organic as true film black and white, but I think it does more good than bad.
Yeah,
overall.
I loved the black and white. The production design, the black and white, the lighting. I think that's the film's strongest element is that, because I do think it really captures the era well. I have no complaints in that department, although I perhaps would have preferred a 4:3 aspect ratio, but that's just me.
That's fair. You don't get a lot of really solid widescreen black and white. How do you feel about the central performance? Speaking of drunk acting.
So, what a strange... I have issues with everything, and yet I can't bring myself to actually dislike anything. If that makes sense.
That's how I feel with the whole movie. Because I
Gary
love
Oldman.
him.
There's literally never a reason to complain about a Gary Oldman performance. Never. With that being said, I think... Is he too old to play Herman Mankiewicz?
I don't know.
Because I think he is. Because when the film...
Herman Mankiewicz was...
The film is he died when he was 55, 58, something like that.
He definitely looks older than that.
Gary Oldman looks older than when Herman Mankiewicz died. That's when you know he might be a little too old. That being said, he's giving a great performance. And for a film that goes to so much trouble to have so accurate reproductions of the Hollywood era, have so many actual Hollywood era players in the film, it's a strange choice. And that's all I'll say about that.
And maybe it's just because right around this time I also watched the first Sam Raimi Spider-Man, which has 33-year-olds in a school bus on the way to a high school field trip. And then I watched The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, where a 52-year-old Jimmy Stewart's playing a young guy straight out of law school. I think it's because I saw those where I'm like, whatever, it's fine.
Oh, I get that attitude.
It's not perfect.
You have to say it wasn't acceptable in The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance. Still good.
Yeah.
But it's just not. Come on.
I think it's because he's 60 playing 40. It'd be one thing if he was 60 playing 20 or 30. And then if you look at the actual Herman Mankiewicz, that man looked aged because of his alcoholism. A picture of him at 40, he looks 50. So it's within the realm of reason, but I also don't care because I feel like that on paper doesn't work. And I feel like the character of Mank on paper is not as interesting as Gary Oldman leads you to believe, but Gary Oldman sells it so well that I don't care.
Gary Oldman is selling a character that I'm not sure is fully there, but he's selling it so well that I am interested. Because
the movie is, again, like most of this movie on paper, I love it because it's a movie about it employs a similar structure to Citizen Kane, where the past informs the future, which informs the past. It's not as clear cut and simple as the Citizen Kane structure, but there's a lot of disenfranchisement that's happening with Mankiewicz working itself into the screenplay. But it's that's cool on paper, but Mankiewicz seems determined from the beginning that he knows exactly what this is about. And I never really got this feeling over the course of the events that happened in the past that Mank was getting disenfranchised or illusioned by everything.
Right.
Because he seems pretty much the exact same from the beginning and the end.
Yes. When you think about the structure, it's the movie is in two halves, essentially. One in the
Yeah.
past and one in the present. And both start at the beginning and then go forward so that the past brings you up until the point that he starts writing the beginning of the film.
Yeah.
And the present goes to the point.
Except for when he gets in a car crash.
Yes.
Which is weird.
There's just like little
Like, it
choices.
should've started
where
with
it's like
that.
it doesn't make sense sometimes. Some of the editing.
Yeah.
That being said, the editing is great.
Oh yeah. My favorite scene in the entire thing is him at the election night party. It's a great sequence.
Put up with your suicidal drinking, your compulsive gambling, your silly platonic affairs.
I gave you a second chance.
How wealth and influence can crush a man.
So yeah, my biggest issue with the film is Mankiewicz himself, because the whole film is about him writing Citizen Kane. And there's so much history and so much backstory to why Citizen Kane was written.
The
in first
manking
place.
of Citizen Kane.
Oh my god.
No, I said that. You didn't say that.
I know.
I'm saying Mank.
I was
Citizen
shocked
Kane.
at the pun levels of cringe of that. It was great though. So I get the feeling that the film was far more interested in the why Citizen Kane was written versus the how it was written. Which, if that makes sense. Like we get a little messy, but a good explanation of why what drove Mank to write about William Randolph Hearst and everything around him, and all the studio that kind of drove him to write, which is essentially a movie that's a hit piece on the big wigs behind the scenes and all that.
I love the guy who played Meyer.
Oh,
Mayer.
Louis Mayer.
Yeah.
Okay, I don't want to get sidetracked before I finish this. This is the problem with discussing this film, is because you think about one thing, and then there's like 10 other things like, oh, I love that, or I don't like that, or that. Anyway.
Yeah.
But no, like I was disappointed on the Mank writing the script side, which seemed more interested in his drinking problem than it was
and
like his
assistants
creative process.
Yeah.
Which I wanted to know, like, show me some development and like, how are you actually writing it? Where are you getting inspiration for these things? Like,
because there was no creative process. He didn't have like an aha moment. As soon as he started writing, he knew exactly everything that was going to happen. It's like all of the character progression was happening in the past, and when we go to what's happening in the future, there are these stakes, like, he's not finishing on time, or he's not meeting his deadlines, but he's a very confident man in the future because he knows exactly what it's going to be about. And the only conflict is the artificial time constraint and the implications of writing this hit piece on William Randolph Hearst, which again aren't also fully explored.
So I'm thinking of Topsy Turvy, which is kind of a similar film about creative process and all that. And I think there's another movie that I'm trying to think of, but there's some really great editing in Topsy Turvy, where Gilbert is trying to think of...
Gilbert is Jim Broadbent.
Yes. Gilbert is trying to figure out what is he going to write. And he sees the samurai sword, and he goes, like, you see the creative spark, and then you cut immediately to the opening, like they're already practicing, like it's already written. And I wanted something like that, some like efficient editing that kind of, something from like The Social Network, something I'd expect from that kind of film, where you see Herman writing something very specific, and then you cut back in time, and that's motivating the jump back in time to see why he's writing it. And then you finish that, and there's something at the end of that sequence that motivates the jump forward in time to where Mank is doing something else that is being informed about what you just saw. And I didn't really see the interplay between the past and the present, and the intercutting between those two that would have really drawn the film together for me.
Yeah, and there's not even really much in the past that's affecting him. I guess the biggest thing that motivates him is this smear campaign that the Hearst is running against Bill Nye the Science Guy. But even then, you're like, he's so tangentially connected to this thing that's like, okay, what is exactly inspiring you here?
Ultimately, the film is two different stories. I get the feeling like Mank dealing with alcohol and trying to write the thing, and then everything before. The everything before was what really made the film for me. Like seeing the history of Hollywood and everything going into it.
Yeah.
And then the politics and what was going on at the time. That's
surprisingly
really
relevant too.
Interesting. Yes.
Yeah.
The election,
especially the media
all
campaigns.
that stuff, the Upton Sinclair stuff, the talk of Roosevelt. There's a really great dialogue scene where they're all at the first party with William Randolph Hearst and the
Myers'
mayor,
birthday party.
and they're talking about the Nazis, and they're like, "What's a concentration camp? Oh, that's nothing." And they're like dismissing the Nazis, and Mayor's like, "They wouldn't do anything." And it's really like that kind of stuff that immediately places the film in context.
Yeah.
That made it interesting, like made that dialogue kind of like come alive for me. That's what I really loved about it.
Tangent also, it's that kind of stuff that I wish was in like Black Klansman. So I do a similar thing in Black Klansman, but it hits you over the head. But yeah, surprisingly based movie. Mank is based.
I think my biggest issue, because everything I've talked about so far I can look past and doesn't bother me all that much, or doesn't affect my enjoyment.
Yeah.
My biggest issue is that I'm not sure, like, who is this movie for?
Yeah, because
you have to have seen Citizen Kane and have like a working knowledge of Hollywood to really, really appreciate what the movie is doing.
Yeah. Okay, so
which I have.
This gave me a similar vibe to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, where you kind of have to understand the changing landscape of Hollywood. You have to understand who Sharon Tate was, stuff like that. That stuff is a little more public knowledge. It's more mainstream knowledge. This stuff it's really niche, because like when I'm watching it, I see Herman Mankiewicz meeting Randolph Hearst, and I'm like, oh. I immediately, in my head, I'm like, okay, this is the guy. Let's see how this turns out.
He's the villain of the whole thing. And the movie just doesn't really bother explaining who he is.
Yeah. But again, like, I understand how that's a problem, because most people who don't know the story of Citizen Kane and how it was written and what it's about, they'd be clueless. But at the same time, I'm like, I do know. And it almost feels like this is a super niche movie for my interests. And there's something to like about that, but at the same time, you have to think about it in the broader context where, I don't know. That's what everything about this movie I love and hate at the same, not hate. I love and I'm frustrated by at the same time.
Yeah.
Because I've been doing nothing essentially but talking shit about it, but I still gave it 4.5 stars, and it's probably my favorite movie that came out this year. Because it's fun. It's hard to make a movie like this fun. I think it's fun.
It is. I enjoyed watching it. That's, ultimately I have all these complaints, but at the end of the day, if I enjoyed watching it, I thought it was worth my time. How bad could it really be?
There's stuff there that frustrates me, but it's stuff that it also interests me, because there's movies that do this kind of thing often where by the end I feel unsatisfied and that it kind of missed on all of its marks, but it accomplishes just enough of what it's trying to do to the point where I'm like, I could go back again and maybe I have confidence that on a second watch, it will make more sense to me. Because it's throwing so much at you, I feel, that maybe on a second or third watch, you would pick up on a lot more and it would feel more organic, but there's still a lot of stuff that just doesn't work. But it's not frustrating enough for me to not care.
It was never frustrating as a film, and Fincher's too competent to ever have it be frustrating. It was almost fun, as like I felt like I was part of the in crowd, like, oh, I know who these people are, at watching it, right? Like Irving Thalberg, who knows who Irving Thalberg is, but he is, another villain in the story.
It's funny because you can go on Letterboxd and you just know that anyone who gave this movie 4 or above has seen every single Orson Welles commercial. Which, speaking of, Orson Welles in this movie.
Disappointed there wasn't more.
I'm not even disappointed that there wasn't more. I'm disappointed at the guy who actually did it. Because his voice was amazing, but he did not look at all like him. Like, distractingly so.
I don't mind all that much. I don't know. It's hard to play Orson Welles. Only Orson Welles could do a good Orson Welles. And
because it's because Orson Welles on paper is the biggest fucking asshole on the planet.
And I just love thinking about Orson Welles as a person. It's funny how near the end of his career, doing the commercials and stuff, it's like he became a parody of himself as he was going on, which makes it even harder to act as him when you're thinking of him as late stage Orson Welles versus young boy genius Orson Welles.
Yeah.
And
You made yourself court jester.
Nobody makes a monkey out of William Randolph Hearst.
All of the fight between Orson and Mank at the end. Spoiler alert. I mean, can you really spoil the story of writing?
No, because you don't know the story.
I guess you can. I felt like it was too little, too late.
Yeah.
The whole argument between the two of them was the first real scene we had between the two of them, and I felt it was entirely manufactured for this moment. And I don't know. I feel like the interesting Mankiewicz stuff is all the stuff that happens afterwards, where he is gypped, or he feels gypped. He wrote what he thinks is the best script of his life, and then Orson goes in and changes so much of it.
Yeah.
And then at the end,
I think part of it.
Yeah.
Well, also, there's this implication that he is washed up, but you never really get a sense of that, because even in his heyday, you're like, is he a super famous writer or anything? I don't know. He hangs around with a bunch of the other writer dudes. I also love that his brother is 40 years younger than him. The Orson Welles Mank relationship, it should have been a lot more. I was getting flashbacks to Adam Sandler and Philip Seymour Hoffman in Punch Drunk Love, where they just have phone interactions, but when they finally meet, it's amazing. But in this, it was just kind of Orson Welles has his little boy tantrum, and it feels very.
It feels like, I feel like they got Orson Welles right, at least on paper.
Yeah, they got the ego down and the wonderkind, the boy genius stuff, but the actual guy himself, I don't know. He didn't have the same bravado.
No.
Same confidence. Did a great voice.
Would you have anyone else in mind? Regardless of voice, who might also play
It's
Orson?
so hard because I feel like the people who look like him don't sound like him.
Yeah.
Like in Ed Wood, when it was two different people. I don't know. And the makeup is also distracting. There was a Richard Linklater movie that had Orson Welles in it that I thought that guy did pretty good, but that was 15 years ago.
I think they should just get the animated version of Orson Welles from The Critic and just have an animated Orson Welles wander onto screen in this live action film.
No, I'm going to say Jack Black.
That'd be great for I think there's a good Orson Welles biopic comedy.
He played Orson Welles in a Drunk History episode on the making of Citizen Kane.
Well, then he's perfect already.
Yeah, it's hard because you have to. It's hard. Or he really was one of a kind.
I think you could do a Mishima, A Life in 4 Chapters, but Orson Welles a lot. And you have the Frozen
Could you imagine how
era.
Great that would be? Child Orson Welles and Citizen Kane Orson Welles, and then Champagne Orson Welles.
102, take 2.
Chimes at midnight, grotesquely fat Orson Welles. Get Christian Bale and he'll actually lose the weight.
And where Mrs. Buckley grows frozen peas. Every July, peas grow there. I love the commercials.
Sweating his ass off in the Dick Cavett show. Great.
We need a good Orson Welles biopic. The issue, though, is who plays Orson Welles, and I'm not sure there's anyone alive who could carry that.
No.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Sad.
Like, I think the biggest part of this movie is that Mankiewicz is just not as interesting a character as you would think.
I think there was potential for him to be an interesting character. It just didn't come across, or at the very least, like
Yeah.
because like again, going back to like the creative process, I wanted to see. Cool, drinking is fine. You have a drinking problem. That's not enough to sustain half of the movie.
It's not even really a problem.
And it's just like the film just goes over
Yeah.
him writing it, like actually coming up with ideas and stuff. That's interesting stuff. And it spends too much time worrying about stuff that doesn't matter versus the stuff that it could have created more character for, particularly in that second half when he's writing the script.
Also, one big issue that I have, again, the election night sequence, best sequence in the movie, I think. It's great. But he goes back in debt like $24,000 and his wife doesn't care.
I mean, she's angry with him.
So that was... Is she? I didn't even get that much.
She's like, don't do this, Mank, and then she walks away. And then they dance.
I also love the assistant. There's like this weird subplot where the assistant's husband might have died in the war.
Stuff like that, where it's nice, but...
You know what I was thinking of the whole time? To make this more interesting for me, I was just like, in my mind, I'm like, okay, her husband is the guy from A Matter of Life and Death. Even though he finds an American girl over there in England. I don't know.
Could be.
Hey.
Hey.
I don't know. It's a fine addition to the Orson Welles cinematic universe.
Yes.
But like every film in that cinematic universe, it can never top the intrigue of the real thing. It's a mess, but I like it and I recommend it.
I think Charles Dance, after Game of Thrones, will forever be pigeonholed into the old, powerful man role.
Did Charles Dance like stood up once this whole movie at the end?
He was in this as William Randolph Hearst, which I think is great casting as Hearst. But since I mentioned this before, my mom was watching The Crown, and he's in that as an old English lord, and he does.
Oh, not him.
Does really well. Charles Dance.
Can't believe they type against cast or cast against type.
Anyway,
Mank, good. Mank, good.
Mank, good. Great period piece. If you like the history of Hollywood, it's a movie for you.
You pick a fight with Willie, you are finished.
Mank. Mr. Mankiewicz.
So The Third Man is our movie for the week.
The Third Man.
Directed by not Orson Welles.
Carol Reed.
Reed.
Produced by good old David O. Selznick.
Yeah.
Was Selznick in Mank? I feel like he was mentioned at least.
That name sounds familiar.
David O. Selznick. Big name. So The Third Man is an all-time classic.
It is.
Is Mr. Martins engaged on a new book?
Yes. It's a murder story. It's based on fact. It's called The Third Man.
It's a 1949 British film noir film. It's about an American writer, Pulp Fiction kind of writer, who visits Vienna after the war and arrives to visit his old friend Harry Lime. He finds Harry Lime is dead, and he tries to figure out who did it, because there was a third man at the scene of the crime.
An unidentified third man at the scene of the crime. Is this still one of your favorite movies? Oh no. He's gonna break my heart for the second consecutive episode. First Blade Runner and now this. Ugh.
Yes.
Cringing right now.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. It's probably near the bottom of the list, but it is still most certainly one of my favorite films. And I'm glad
I'll say
very
this.
glad I rewatched it.
Yeah. It's been in my top 10 as long as I've had my top 10. And I will say this, I can understand why it doesn't fall or it has fallen so much, because it's one of those movies that, if you watch something like Blade Runner or like Inside Llewyn David, well, for me at least, or like Mulholland Drive, I feel like you can watch those things and get like some sort of new meaning every time. The Third Man isn't really that. kind of lays all of its cards out on the table. You can understand everything about it from the first viewing, but my appreciation of it has only grown more over time.
I actually found some interesting stuff to think about it this time around.
Okay, interesting.
Yes, because I was actually thinking about that exact thing. Like, what is there behind the scenes of this? What kind of thematically is going on here? It most certainly deserves to be on the BFI greatest films of all time list. I think it probably deserves to be even higher than it is. I'm just going to skip right ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine. I agree. I feel like it. Come on, we've made the odd reference to this movie a few times on the way to this movie, and I feel like people should know at this point. But yeah, good movie, very good movie.
I'm like struggling to like where do you even begin, because you could talk about the amazing performances, you could talk about the iconic score, the great editing, particularly in the opening scene and the chase scene near the end, the direction from Carol Reed. This is one of like the only films on the BFI list by a director no one really remembers.
Yeah.
And
sad.
Yeah, it is an auteurless masterpiece, essentially.
Mm-hmm. I'll start with just, I think the thing that always fascinates me about this movie, like you were saying with Eraserhead and Blade Runner, this is a hell of a world that they portray. And it's a real place, and it's a real time in history, and it feels borderline dystopian, but it's like the first attempts at fixing it, It's an entire, not just the city, but entire world in transition, in reparation. And there's still rubble, and there's still like people cast aside, homes destroyed, reparations being made. No one knows exactly what's going on. It's divided into four corners. There's still chaos and evil running amok, but the big boys are squashed. So you get the sense that everyone has something else on their mind. It's just a very odd and very well portrayed corner of the world in time and place. Yeah. That's something that always gets me.
The mood of the film is kind of three things kind of work together to create the mood, and each one is kind of doing something different, which is interesting because you have the world of the film, as you were just talking about, the bombed out Vienna, the rubble and ruins of a once beautiful city, and then you have the zither music, which is just this zany, fun, melancholic, like there's so many different adjectives that are different that you could use to describe that music, and it fits so well, but that's creating like a whole separate mood altogether, and adding another layer of mood on top of the scenery. And the one that always gets me, and the one that I think really draws me in every time, is I think this is one of like the great examples of performances creating a mood unto themselves. How Holly Martins and what's her name?
Victoria. I don't know.
Anna Schmidt. They just, watching them on screen is just so melancholic, and they create this vibe that kind of completes the picture of like sadness and disenchantment that kind of pervades the entire film. And Joseph Cotten, this is his role. Like, this is, as much as I like him in Magnificent Ambersons, this is Joseph Cotten's best performance.
And Citizen Kane.
And Citizen Kane, sure. But him, actress that plays Anna Schmidt, and Harry Lime, they all, the performances themselves create a mood.
My favorite moment with not Harry, Holly Martins. My favorite moment, and this is something that like I didn't really notice until this time, was when he gives his speech. And I just picked up a copy of Ulysses by James Joyce, and they're all trying to ask him like real literary questions.
That's a difficult read, my friend.
I have it for later, but like he's up there and he doesn't really know what he's gonna say, and then people are like, ask him to explain stream of consciousness, and then you have this guy who just writes dumb little Western pulpy novels going, stream of what?
I was struck by that scene this time of like, one, this is the most pretentious culture club I've ever seen. Like, I don't care who you are. Like, what's wrong with pulpy Western novels? That's interesting. It's different. It's unique. How often do you get to talk to someone who writes that?
Yeah,
sure.
It feels like
no
Roland
James
Emmerich
Joyce,
at the
but-
Criterion offices.
Yeah, but that's interesting because of how
it
strange
is. It is. Yeah.
Like, why? You're being rude to your guest. Stop it. To be fair, he's kind of clueless, and I love that. And I love
It's great.
the narrative implications of that scene. How like the whole film is about Holly Martins being disenchanted with Harry Lime, his friend, and there's like this mini subplot of him. People think he's a great writer, and then the crowd themselves gets like expectation versus reality, and that theme is reiterated in that scene where the crowd is like, "This guy's an idiot. See ya."
Yeah, I know I just said that this movie doesn't have a lot to go back, but there's something that just occurred to me is that I think it's also thematically interesting that this guy who made a living making really simple stories of good versus evil has lost his footing in a world where good versus evil has never been more complicated.
Yeah.
No, there's this amoralness to everyone in this world where even the British general, I always forget his name. The one that he
Major
associates
Calloway.
himself. Major Calloway. Even I still am on the fence of whether or not he's a good guy. Because he was willing to sell Anna or whatever to the Russians and it didn't really help much.
He's not selling them to the Russians. It's his job.
Oh, just indifferent. Because he puts up a little bit of a fight saying, "Are you really going to send her back to the Russians?" They say it's his job. And he's like, whatever. It's interesting. And I think that's why it works so well, is because you're right. This is Joseph Cotton's best performance.
You could even think about it in terms of this is like America coming to terms with the atrocities of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
Like Joseph Cotton is like, "Go get them, Americans, coming to whip the Nazi asses." And then suddenly you finally get to Germany, and it's like, uh-oh, there's some bad shit here. And it's no longer the Europe of old that you know. So
everything's crumbling, everything's destroyed.
Read it from that angle of there's certainly like for me, I felt like there's like the philosophy of absurdism running throughout the whole thing, of just like how meaningless everything that Holly Martins tries to do is. Harry Lime's own philosophy of like, would you really care if one of those dots stopped moving? And that it's kind of the whole, like the premise, when you think of the whole film, spoiler alert, I'm sure everyone, you should have seen this already, by the way, dear listener. But the whole film is essentially saying, how do you get an old friend to want to murder his best friend? Because that's like the ending of the movie, and the kind of absurd implications of that, of like how far Holly Martins has come and like sunk in the cesspool of post-war Vienna.
It's also crazy to me that, again, like we were talking with Mank, at the end of Mank, you finally have Mank and Orson Welles meeting. That's really their only scene together, and it feels like there's not a lot. Holly and Harry have one scene together. As in one scene where they're talking. They have the scene when he finds him and he chases him, and then the scene at the end where he chases him. But there's only one scene where they're sitting in a room talking with each other, and it's the scene on the
Ferris wheel.
Ferris wheel, and it's amazing, and that's all you need. And it still blows my mind that you can get so much in that one scene, because the build up to Harry Lime's insane. It's great.
It's the textbook, like, build up to a character kind of thing.
But there's so much build up that I'm convinced that if it was literally anybody else but Orson Welles, they'd fuck it up.
Yeah, no, you have to have Orson Welles. There are two of I think the most enduring cinematic images in this film, and one of them is, of course, Harry Lime's introduction, which is, all-time great scene.
When the zither music kicks in on the Zoom, it's great.
And let's not forget the little kitty cat, who
great.
who begins the scene by like curling up in Orson Welles' by his feet and starts playing with his shoelace. It's like, oh, it's adorable. But the editing in that, the way the scene builds up, and then you finally get Orson Welles, and he gives you that damn little smile, just like
charming,
but a psychopath.
But he is horrible. I always forget how horrible he is.
He is a bad man.
There's no grayness.
No.
I remember the first time I watched it, I was thinking, damn, how could you sell him out like that, Holly? Like, you were a little quick to make this decision. But no, he's horrible. He's absolutely terrible.
And like the film leads you on that path of like discovery of how bad he is. Because like you hear about it, and like Calloway is like, oh, we're after him because he did some bad stuff. And he's like, oh, he's the medicine and all that. And then you get the scene with him, and he's like, oh, would you really mind if any of those dots stop moving? Like, this is a bad guy. And then it's finally like reiterated to you when you go to the hospital with Holly Martins, and he sees like the kids who are suffering. It's like, okay, now he's a bad guy. And the film takes you with Holly on the step of realizing that Harry Lime is not someone who is your friend.
But he does have my favorite line in the movie, which is, in Switzerland, they had brotherly love and they had 500 years of democracy and peace. And what did that produce? The cuckoo clock.
So long, Holly.
Just as graceful an exit as an entrance. And that's it. That's all you hear from him. I guess, you know, they talk briefly in the cafe before he flees.
Yeah. And then
he doesn't say anything at the... Oh, he shouts after him, but Harry Lime doesn't respond.
Yeah.
In the sewers.
The other really enduring image from this movie for me is Harry Lime's death, as he's running through the sewers, and then to cap it all off, as he's been shot and he's struggling up the stairs, and he's reaching up through this metal grate into the cool, and it cuts to like outside the grate, and it's this really great edit where you've been in this kind of sound deprivation where all you hear are like shouting people and the thundering of the water in the sewers, and then you cut outside and it's the wind and it's quiet. You can just see him struggling for his life, and it's one of the best images of like someone like holding on for dear life. Like, he's a terrible person, but wants to live.
Yeah. I know I feel like I bring up this movie every podcast, but when I was watching him climb up the stairs to the grate, you know what I was thinking of?
The lighthouse.
The lighthouse at the end when he's making his way to the light. It's a similar grate pattern, and he's grunting up the stairs similarly.
Yeah, sure.
But yeah, that shot, the sound is great overall, but I had that one moment where it's a moment of appreciation, like when Harry's like running around through the sewers and he has that moment where he doesn't know where to go. It's just quick cuts to all these empty corridors, and the sound, you literally can't tell where it's coming from, which I thought was interesting. But yeah, that one shot, you get that one shot of his fingers poking out, and it's an image you can feel. You can feel the way the wind is blowing through his fingertips in that moment, and it's just really, really fucking great filming.
It is simple, really simple,
very simple,
and it like the whole thing is just driven by really great character stuff. You feel everyone has a very unique position and thoughts, and you know who the characters are. It's one of those movies, like, it's not like we're Mank, where like you're always trying to figure out exactly who everyone is, what's their angle. You know what people think and feel. You can feel what they feel and how they feel it. Particularly Anna.
Yeah. Anna.
I always get a very melancholic vibe whenever she's on screen.
I love the police assistant or whatever that loves Harry Lime's books, and I'm always sad when he dies.
Sergeant Payne.
Big sad. Sergeant Payne.
Which is ironic because he punches Holly Martins, gives him the pain.
He does. Yeah, it's also one of the best, I think, ending shots ever.
It's one of the best opening scenes, and one of the best ending scenes ever.
Oh my god, it's one of my favorite opening scenes, and it wasn't this until this time that I watched it that you can hear like just how, especially to the second half of that monologue over the opening scene, you can just feel how like rushed and indifferent the narration is. It's almost because it wasn't.
It's also kind of fun.
Correct me if I'm wrong. It's very fun, but correct me if I'm wrong. Wasn't the voiceover like a last minute choice by Carol Reed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and it almost feels like that, especially in the end, because he has the romanticizing stuff at the beginning. That I remember the old Vienna before the war, blah blah blah.
I never knew the old Vienna before the war.
But then when you get to the actual like plot, it almost feels like an afterthought. It was like, oh, and then there's Harry, and then there's Holly, and blah blah blah. Here we go. It's fun.
It drops you in. Like the narrator is just rushing to drop you into the middle of the narrative. Great way to start the movie. And then,
it's
and then it ends with one of the great last shots of a movie of Anna just walking down the aisle of trees past
so great.
Holly, and the zither music playing. This time I notice it every time, but Holly Martins at the very end lights a cigarette, just throws away a match in frustration. Great little gesture there.
Yeah, the ending of the narration, when he actually starts explaining what's happening, he says, "Oh, I was going to tell you. Wait, I was going to tell you about Holly Martins, an American. Came all the way here to visit a friend of his. The name was Lime, Harry Lime." It's almost like he's in the recording booth, and he gets really crazy about going over Vienna, but there's just some guy behind a sound glass window going, he's like, "Oh, yes, Harry Lime."
Ah, yes, our next guest on the show, Harry Lime.
It's great. What else did he make? I thought there was some other stuff I recognized.
Another interesting little shot, kind of mirror thing I caught on this viewing is when Holly goes to visit Dr. Winkle, and
Winkle.
And he's like, "I'd like to see Dr. Winkle," and he says, "I'm a friend of Harry Lime's." And then you don't see Dr. Winkle, but you see him cutting a turkey, and it's kind of like Harry Lime's introduction, where like you see something the character is doing, and then you see the character. So great little editing kind of mirror image there. It's like poetry.
They have that. They have that. It's something that the Coen brothers talk about a lot, where every single character, no matter how small, should be memorable just by their like appearance and how they talk. I feel like this is one of those things that every character who has a speaking role, you don't remember their names, but you remember how they talk or how they act. One of my favorites is the kid, who's arguably the only bad performance in the movie, but it's cute.
He's a cute kid. Like...
The kid is like, "Murderer!"
He's got his little ball. He's great.
He's got his little ball. He's chubby little German cheeks. He spikes the camera like every other sentence, but it's cute. It's fun.
Good old German kid. Or Austrian, my bad.
Who cares? It's four corners.
Great line, memorable line that really kind of cements Holly's character. Major Calloway says, "You were born to be murdered." Always gets a little laugh out of me. Like, you're right. You're right. He's just he's like a Boy Scout. He's very eager, very kind of naive view of the world. And, he's thrust into this a world of Dutch angles and rubble. And what is there not to like?
Dialogue. There's nothing.
Exactly.
There's nothing.
It might be a
perfect movie. That's the thing, is that it's like Casablanca, where it's just so perfect that, I get the same experience every time. There's not too much depth to it that stimulates me every time, but I just love it so much that I can't ever like take it off my top 10. It's just it's too good. It's too good.
For me, it's like going back and you're visiting an old friend. That's the feeling I get whenever I watch The Third Man.
There's another one of those movies that, like, very rarely did we have screenings in class, but the stuff that I don't know. I mean, there's stuff that I watched in class that I didn't like Killer of Sheep. I never really liked, but like, I watched The Third Man. I watched Sunrise. It's just all around solid stuff that stays with me. And
Yeah.
Third Man's easily one of my favorites, and it does not deserve to be on the BFI list. I'm kidding. It does.
Of course.
I agree. It should go higher. It should be much, because it's a fucking British guy. How often does that happen?
It should be in the top 50, the very least.
But let's also remember, this is the same list that does not have the red shoes, which is still their biggest crime. It is it's English. Let them have it. Put Mike Lee on. Put the red shoes on. Stop being cowards. Maybe we should also mention the fact that they had a real Hollywood score for this movie, and then they ditched it when they were out drinking and they heard this guy play the zither.
Did you...
you should do it.
Anton Karas? Yeah, Anton Karas. He didn't... The music for the film, he just kind of winged it. Didn't write any of it down. And I was actually watching one of the bonus features on the Blu-ray I have, the Studio Canal Blu-ray. And...
I didn't know there was one.
It's
an elusive
there's a zither, an Austrian woman zither player, and she says that she had to like transcribe and like figure out and actually like write down the score because he never wrote it down. He just kind of played it.
And it feels like that, but in a good way.
Yeah, in a great way. It's one of the best scores ever. Most iconic at the very least, if you don't even agree with that.
It's the only reason people know what a zither is.
I did feel kind of bad for her, this zither player. She's like, yeah, I have to teach all my students to play the third man, because whenever we ever play the zither, when we go abroad, everyone wants to hear the third man. Like, that's all they know. This is the only piece of music on the zither anyone knows.
But hey, there are worse pieces of music to have. Yeah, I don't know if it's like one of my favorite scores, but the theme is one of my favorites. The one that plays in the opening. The only two like times where the score is like in my head that I can remember is the opening theme, and then when you see Harry Lime.
There's more.
Because it makes me feel like the zither player is just like watching the movie. He's just watching the movie, the zither in his hand, and they're recording the audio. And then Carol Reed is off to the side, and every time he points at him, Carol Reed points, is like, play! And it just plays whatever comes to his mind.
Another little fun fact I learned when I was watching the bonus features, there's this great virtual tour of Vienna with the third man.
Oh, interesting.
And like you have there's a map of Vienna, and like you select a location, and then it gives you like a 5-minute spot. And the location where Holly Martins visits, it's before the scene with him and Orson on the Ferris wheel.
Ferris wheel.
And he shouts up to the balcony where Winkel and Kurtz are at.
Yeah.
Okay. And in the background of that scene, there's one shot where he's standing in front of a bunch of people who are like clearing rubble behind him in the city. And that rubble is the old Gestapo headquarters that they destroyed.
Very nice.
Yeah.
Also speaking of the Ferris wheel, this Ferris wheel is also historically featured in another one of the greatest movies of all time, that being Before Sunrise.
That's right. It's been a while.
They go into the same Ferris wheel. Yep.
I would love to visit Vienna again and go on a third man tour.
Two of the most romantic scenes ever happened in that Ferris wheel. Celine and Jesse kissing, and then Harry Lime and Holly Martin's breaking up. Okay, I also just say I love every time Orson Welles says "old man."
You really shouldn't have gone to the police, man. Great stuff.
It's a great little pet name. Cute.
Watch The Third Man again.
Great movie.
If you haven't seen it in a while. Deserves to be rewatched.